welcome back to another episode of the Comic Corner. Today I am one of your hosts, TJ, aka Fat Thor, and I am joined today by some very special guests. I am joined today by Joey Esposito and Sean Van Gorman, writer and artist for The Pedestrian. How you guys doing today? Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to come and nerd out with me today.
Thanks for having us. We can't thank you enough for all your support of the book. It's been so delightful to see, and we really appreciate it. So pumped to be here.
It's always a pleasure to be on the internet.
Yeah, I feel like I live. Yeah, I live on the internet. Like, I'm just permanently in the interweb space. But again, I've been just so excited to talk to you guys. The Pedestrian, easily one of my favorite books I have read this year. I went into it not knowing what to expect. Joey was so gracious enough to shoot me over a copy. And I would, like, as soon as I read it, I would, like, just something about it hit me. And I was just like, I love every aspect about this. I love everything about this. So again, I've been super excited to have you guys on. But before we get into The Pedestrian, something we typically like to do on this show is kind of comic origin story, which I know you guys have done 1,000 times before. But just really quickly for the folks at home watching and listening. So we'll start off with Joey. Joey, you mentioned that, you don't really remember a time before comics, which I think a lot of us can relate to. But something that's really interesting is that your parents were actually readers and collectors. So you kind of inherited that from them. And you mentioned Superman comics, specifically Death of Superman, really got you going. And you just decided, like, this is what I want to do. And so I'm curious, what were some of those, like when you decided that, what were some of those early steps that you started to take to really kind of learn the craft? And you also talk about being kind of from a small town that a lot of people felt and you felt like was lacking in opportunities. So given all of that, again, what were some of those steps you took to kind of hone that craft and start learning?
It's a great question. So I think originally I decided to go to school. I decided to go to film school because I didn't think that there were comic schools, which is not true. I don't know if it was true back then, but basically I went to film school and learned a lot about storytelling and writing. And then while I was there, they actually offered a course on graphic novels and comic making. One semester was analyzing books. So it was, reading Mouse and all these seminal works and just like analyzing them and doing a deep dive, and a lot of Scott McCloud, understanding comics and things like that. And then the second semester was making our own books, where we essentially made mini comics, comic strips and collections and things. And so it's really just a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of like cartooning yourself. I'm not a good artist, but I think you have to at least try to do that stuff so you have an understanding of how a page works, or like what is actually possible to fit into a scene or into a panel. And so it was just kind of a matter of doing it. And, after college, I just started writing scripts and trying to figure it out, and talking to other up and coming creators who are also trying to figure it out, and all just kind of helping each other. A lot of it based on the internet. Back then there was forums like Digital Webbing and Pencil Jack and places like this, where we used to go to find collaborators who were also like kind of on our level of just trying to figure shit out and understand how to put a book together. And eventually like putting together pitches, doing Kickstarters, printing books ourselves, making all of the mistakes, and just sort of figuring out how to get onto the right path of, not only production, but also like being a good collaborator and what it means to work closely with an artist. And so I think that was roundabout, but it's really just kind of diving in feet first and figuring it out, I think.
Yeah, I find with a lot of creators I talk to, and especially if not being a writer myself, I think a lot of people in the comics community who are fans feel like there's just this big barrier into entry, and like, how do I even start? But all the creators I've talked to always just say, like, you just have to start. Like, that's the biggest thing, is
true.
Just starting. And so for Sean, you kind of have similar story. You also said you were always into comics, into drawing. You also mentioned that you kind of grew up with a lot of different interests that luckily were encouraged. And so you kind of had trouble picking one thing. And it wasn't until kind of your mid-20s that you decided to really focus on art. And so that all kind of led to your first book, Secret Adventures of Houdini, which to promote that book, you would go into comic shops with have people put you in a straitjacket. You try to escape. I saw a story about you chaining yourself outside of Forbidden Planet, talking to some crazy homeless dude for like 8 hours trying to sell your book. So kind of going off of piggybacking off my previous question to Joey, when you decided to really dedicate yourself to art and making comics, again, what were some of those steps that you took to learn the craft, really hone your craft? And also, obviously, you're not afraid to kind of put yourself out there. And as Joey calls it, you have this kind of magician showmanship. So was that something you also kind of just always had, or was that something you sort of developed once you were trying to promote your work and really get your work noticed?
I think it was a natural evolution for everything. I mean, the initial desire kind of stemmed from, as you said, having all these different interests where nothing was really kind of clicking or taking off. Like, doing sketch comedy and being in sketch groups and being in bands and not figuring out like how that. Being in the band is one thing. Getting people to come to the shows was something that always eluded me. So I kind of just had to kind of pick a thing and gave myself a year of that thing. And at the end of that year, ended at Axel Alonso's office at Marvel. So we figured, let's give that another year, where I was working in a hotel and we're working on the early version of Secret Adventures of Houdini, which was my first book working with another writer, first collaborative comic. And the then head of Disney Pictures was a regular at that place, and we'd become friendly. And the hotel had hired me to do this mural on the property that was kind of like in a secret area that this person came across, and had one of those happenings where, like, oh, who did this mural? Sean, you did this? You're an artist? And at the moment, it's like, yes, I am an artist, and I've got a book I'd love to show you. And we had some ash cans. We gave an ash can, and I'll never forget this. He said something to the effect of, I really love the book. We don't really do too much of the publishing, but we just bought Marvel. I could make some calls for you. And
what a chance, dude. Like, that's crazy.
And that was like something that was like our first thing, where that's not something that like happens to people. But sure enough, he made some calls. He sent his copy to Axel Alonso at Marvel, and we got a call from Axel's assistant to schedule a meeting for us to come and talk about our book at Marvel Comics. So it took every iota of strength to not like quit my job right there. Because I was working with my writing partner there. I was like, so do we just quit? And he goes, let's take the meeting first, and then we'll decide.
Good advice.
So we get there, and sure enough, he had read the book a few times. He had notes for us, and we sat for like an hour and talked about, comics and what we wanted to do. And the first thing he said was, thank you so much for sending me a comic, because I never get to read comics anymore. And that blew our minds. Like, you're the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. You don't get to read comics? No. They just see pieces of the comic along the way. They never really get the time to sit down and enjoy this finished product. They've seen the script, they've seen the art, they've seen the covers, they've seen it on papers on their wall being pulled together, but never, sitting down and just really enjoying this. And the other thing that really, really stuck with us was he said, what do you guys want to do? And we're like, we want to make comics. And he goes, no, you've done that already. What do you want to do next? And this was about, Lord, maybe like 12 years ago at this point. And we were like, oh, well, what do you want to do? And he was like, I want to start a company where we generate and package, properties, like for IP, and make books that go on to media. And sure enough, that's exactly what he did with AWA Studios. And I ran into him in New York for the first time since that meeting last year. And we're able to, we had a copy of the Pedestrian Ash Can, and we were talking about AWA and congratulating him of remembering that was what you told us in your office was your dream, and then you went off and did that thing, and how fantastic that was. And in terms of the straitjacket stuff, that's just something that we kind of lifted from Houdini, because we were new artists and we were going to shows and looking around, and when you go to comic convention, you see a lot of tables and people are at the tables, and who's going to give a fuck about us? What can we do that's going to make us different from every other person here? And the idea of just getting a straitjacket and doing these big public performances and chaining myself to the outside of Forbidden Planet, these are just ideas. These were literally the first thought that came to my head, and no one said no. We're at Forbidden Planet. They're ordering books from us directly, and we're out of books. We're waiting on new books. So we say, let's do an event when we get the new books in. And they're like, oh, what do you want to do? I was like, I don't know. What if we chain me outside the store or something? And Jeff at Forbidden Planet, I was like, yeah, cool, let's do it. And like, oh, cool. Yeah, we'll do that. And it rained the entire day. This is February, middle of winter, pouring rain. And I remembered oh, we got the books. Let's do it Tuesday. It'll be a nice, beautiful day. And they're like, no, let's do it Wednesday. It's New Comics Day. Rain the whole day. And I have to do this because Bleeding Cool had done a story about it. A few other prominent creators retweeted this. So this was a thing that I have to do this now.
You committed at that point.
Yeah, and it was one of the weirdest days that I've ever done, but I've always tried to be open to things and not to be judgmental, and embrace the moment as it's happening, and to try to enjoy these moments when you get them, because it was such a surreal experience. Like the first guy you mentioned was clearly insane. You could tell by the way he's walking. He's just walking funny. So we figure we'll rattle off the first pitch. Cool. Hey man, who we're doing? We're doing this book, and we run out of things to talk about. We told him our entire life story. He's just standing there kind of with a blank face, and he kind of gets in my face, trying to look past my sunglasses. He's like, nah, you're not Houdini. And I'm like, no, I'm not Harry Houdini, but I do this book about Harry Houdini. And he's like, yo, I do comics. I'm like, oh, cool. What kind of stuff? And he goes, check it. I made a character who's the daughter of Batman and Catwoman. And so we're like, oh, that's cool. Is there anything like the Huntress? He's like, nah, who's that? So we're like, oh, okay. Well, DC Comics, who owns these characters, has been kind of doing something exactly like that for 30 years. And he had not heard of this. He was not aware of this. This crushed his one dream, and he's having a meltdown.
Such a dream crusher.
Yeah, you just blew that guy's world up.
And I can't walk away. I'm stuck with this because I'm chained to the pole. So I go, you know what? There's a comic shop right over there. You should go in and go talk to them. They'll show you. And I'm pretty sure Matt Rosenberg, back when in his retail days, was working that day. And I sent him directly into his path. And you see the guy walking back and forth, and then vanished. And this was 8 hours of that.
And I also, I just want to also say about the advice of just make comics. I know for people trying to break in or get into the sphere of just being a comic creator, I know that sounds like it's not helpful advice, and it can be very frustrating, but it truly is the only advice that can be offered. It's trial by error. You're going to make a lot of shit that is just bad, and that's okay. That's part of, you have to find the enjoyment of that, and the enjoyment of these weird situations that you find yourself in promoting your books or trying to get your books made. You're gonna stumble. You're gonna, I don't know if I've said this like publicly, but like 12 years ago, I got a meeting with a higher up editor at DC, and I beefed it so hard, and it's haunted me forever. But that shit just happens, and I learned a lot from it, and I'll never let that happen again. But I feel like I'm better for it, and not everyone's just gonna make their first thing and be an overnight success. There's very rarely an actual overnight success, and usually you're only just now hearing about us, but we've actually been doing this for 20 years or whatever. It is really a marathon, not a sprint, and the only way to even approach something resembling a finish line is to just start running, and it's just the only thing that you can do. And however you get that done, aside from using AI, you should do it. You draw terribly. Like, some of the best webcomics are just stick figures. So like, there's no reason that you can't just put pen to paper and start making it happen,
And to add on to what Joey's saying is, like, yes, make a book, but not only that, make that book the best book you can make. Then show it to people. Show it to everyone who will look at it. Be open to criticism, especially if you're showing it to someone who if you show it to like a comic pro that you respect or admire. If they're very rarely will someone give you a note to hurt you or to make you feel bad. No one's going to say you shouldn't do this, kid. They'll say, you should work on your anatomy, or you should work on, your storytelling's there. Maybe work on your buildings, maybe take a few classes, and, take those notes and then make another book. And that book's going to be better than the first book you made because you've had this experience and you've gotten these notes. And, rejection and criticism are paramount to all things here. And if you can't handle either of these two, then that's going to be an issue working long term in this industry, because everyone's got a note, everyone has an opinion about what you should be doing, and sometimes editorial just needs to give you a note just so they can put their little spin on it just to get it out there.
Yeah, I love that so much, and especially how you guys talk about, like Sean, you promoting the book with the straitjacket and all that. Like, you could have taken that situation and like been nervous about it, like, oh gosh, like, it's my first book, but you took that opportunity to, like you said, enjoy it and have fun with it. And I think that's so awesome. And same thing with Joey, like how you expanded on that advice. I think that's just so important, and something that people who aren't in the comic industry or like in the sphere, just like it, like you said, it's kind of hard to understand that advice at face value. So, and that definitely applies to your guys' later work in, Pedestrian, and you guys, excuse me, all of that kind of stuff came full circle for you guys. I mean, Joey, again, you kind of started off with the Superman comics. You've gotten chances to write Batman. Sean, you were doing, some Star Trek fan films. You've been able to work on Star Trek now. So again, like, it just goes to show you guys have been in the trenches, and you just have to put the work in and start the work. And so that all kind of led
my fan film.
What'd you say?
Oh no, you've seen my fan film.
Star Trek 12, baby. I love it.
That was fun completely from an extravagant tip from Jennifer Aniston. She gave me like a $400 tip. And I go, oh, I know what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to make a Star Trek fan film on a
That's a crazy story in itself. Shout out.
Hope does that mean you listed her as executive producer?
No, I want to get her. I don't want to get her jammed up. She was so nice.
Said Sean, I took all the credit. Shout out to her. That's awesome. But all of this kind of experience and, again, honing your craft, this all led to you guys eventually meeting. You guys met online when Joey put out a call for an artist. Sean just happened to respond, which obviously was a great choice because it has led to all these great other works. But I want to ask, I know that your guys' relationship kind of started off a little rocky. I mean, maybe rocky's not the right word, but was that?
This is the book. This is Pawn Shop.
Beautiful. There we go, baby. So this pawn shop's kind of like a slice of life sort of story, kind of similar to Pedestrian in its structure. So again, your relationships kind of started off a little rocky, I hear, and I just wanted to ask, kind of also going into the Pedestrian, what's your kind of collaborative process like, and how has that kind of developed as you kind of have grown again into the Pedestrian? I know you guys have worked on some other projects before that haven't seen the light of day yet, but then kind of the lightning struck with Pedestrian.
Yeah, I think Pawn Shop was something that I had been working on, before I hooked up with an artist, and so it was not as organic and collaborative as Pedestrian has become, and I think that is just a maturation of our abilities as creators and as friends and collaborators. But Pedestrian is really, we talk about everything. Sean will read everything that I put together, whether it's a pitch proposal or a issue breakdown and the script, obviously, and all that stuff. And then we'll go through and discuss things that maybe he doesn't like so much or wants to change a little bit, and just find it's a lot of compromise. But I think we both come at it with this idea of the only goal is to make the best possible book that we're both really proud of. And so I'm not a writer who is tied to his ideas. The whole reason I love to do comics is because anything that comes out in a comic book collaboration is going to be better than whatever I could do on my own if I'm writing a novel or whatever it might be. Like, more ideas synthesized through like our weird little lens is always going to be better than just either of us on our own. And so we just really talk over everything and are receptive to each other's ideas. And it's all just very organic, and it's a lot of fun, to be honest. And I don't think that was the case with Pawn Shop, for not reasons relating to each other, but I think that period in our lives just in general was tough. And we were still like getting to know how to put books together and all this stuff. So there was a lot of struggle and a lot of roadblocks, and it was tough, but we learned a lot. And I think as we've grown and moved into the Pedestrian, it's become a really nice sort of workflow that we've established. Again, Sean could disagree, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, no, it's fun to look back at Pawn Shop because it's very much a proto version of what we're kind of doing in Pedestrian, where it's playing with time and perspectives and playing in the slice of life space. It's a similar beat where there's a construct that's bridging these stories together, whereas that was a place, whereas in the Pedestrian it's a person linking these stories together. And if we're looking at the art on Pawn Shop and the art in Pedestrian, it's 12 years apart at this point. It's night and day. And as Joey mentioned, a lot of personal tragedies happened around the time. I was in a weird rocky marriage. My grandfather died. A lot of the emotions that we were going through at the time kind of like seeped into the paper, into the writing. So it's not even, I don't even say I'm drawing figures or drawing characters. I'm drawing like feelings and emotions in a odd watercolor style. And that was kind of the big thing, where we're like, oh yeah, I'll just do an all watercolor book and it'll be great. And not factoring in how much time that would take, where it's like, oh, we're going to do this in 6 months. And it probably took closer to 2 years to finally get it done, in terms of dealing with emotional states and things going wrong in our lives. When if you don't have balance in your life, the art's not going to get done. And that's something that's very tricky to maintain, like keeping that home life balance and that work balance, and in such a way is really the real trick of all of this, where you can keep your adult life together and make up your stories and draw those weird drawings you're trying to make, hopefully for money. And I think, that 10 years of maturing really helped with that. And, the pandemic was a huge tragedy for a lot of people, but creatively, this was great for us because this gave us a lot of time to kind of sit down and really kind of focus on this particular story, where we figured comic shows are not happening anymore. So what are we going to do? So let's just sit down. And we had been talking about this book for a while. I think we'd had maybe a couple of pitch pages and like a pitch together. So we decided to just work on it for a year in secret, where we didn't show it to anyone, completely free of ego, building a very complex, rich universe and a mythos and a history of a deceptively simple story on the surface that's, has layers and layers and layers of nuance and, rejiggering ways of how we want to talk about things and how we want to talk about the world. And we're kind of talking about all the things we're seeing on television at the time of like social justice and isolation and corporations breaking up communities. So there is the comedic aspect to Pedestrian, where it seems like a silly guy wearing an unflattering, I'm told, little onesie walking around. But it's more about everything else than this guy. And it's been really fun to now see the response it's been getting from going in secret and then shopping around to every single publisher that will look at pitches. We've shown it to everyone. And finally finding the right publisher who believes in it and is encouraging us to continue with this and funding the whole thing. And then to see the responses we're getting on the day of release of stores selling out and people having trouble finding copies, and Midtown Comics being sold out. Forbidden Planet is almost sold out. Third Eye Comics, someone walked in on a Sunday morning and bought out all of their stock of the A cover, which is, they had like a 50+ order.
That's awesome.
So it's been fantastic to see this response in real time of how this is going. Like, we really legitimately have a hot book on our hands, and this is not a situation where we've had experience with.
Well, I think you guys are crushing it because, again, I've said it many times. This honestly is my favorite book I've read this year. Again, something about it just really connected with me. And so let's get into the Pedestrian. Also, shout out Magma Comix. Also, great folks over there. Little plug, if you guys want to check out, I've been fortunate enough to interview basically all the creators from Magma. So head on over to Sons of Milnir and you can check out interviews with Jackson Lance and Colin Kelly about Principles of Necromancy, Jason Starr about Silicone Bandits, and Steve Orlando for Scale Trade. And so the Pedestrian, to give a quick little summary for people at home that maybe haven't gotten a chance to pick it up at their shop yet, it is a story about a street-level hero who never breaks the law to fight crime because justice always has the right of way. You will believe a man can walk. And again, I love this book. You guys have described it as Twin Peaks, a little madman with some 80s mannequin and also some Ghostbusters, in the sense of the world is kind of like our world, but there's just kind of one thing that's a little out there or, off. And so, Sean, I want to ask you first. I know, at least from what I've seen, you kind of originally came up with this concept from seeing a street sign. And you had the thought, like, what if Flash wasn't fast and just kind of speed walked everywhere? Or if Superman didn't have his powers? And you came up with this design and you kind of just had this idea and the design. So when you came up with this design originally, was it like an aha moment? Did you feel like, oh, this is really something? Or was it just like, oh, here's another idea, like, let me develop this? Like, I'm picturing you kind of like the Tobey Maguire, like Spider-Man, like going through all the different designs and like you get the perfect one. Was it kind of like that? Or again, did it just like, oh, here's something, let me dig a little deeper in this? And then obviously you reached out to Joey eventually.
Yeah, I think it was pretty close to that initial idea. And thank you so much for doing the heavy lifting on this interview. You're very well researched, and you know the story
Thank
already,
you so
and
much.
you letting everyone else know before, so I don't have to repeat it. So I appreciate that. But it was kind of like, boom. Okay, he's all in white, so figure what if Batman, instead of seeing a bat that night, became enamored with the little blinking man and the street walking sign, and also what if he didn't have any money? So I figured what would be like a really cheap way of putting together this suit and just being this white man walking around. And I think the earliest version of it was I was kind of this guy all in white walking around in real time, because I was just loved the idea of maybe just doing a whole issue where he's just kind of walking from A to B from like different angles, and how dumb that would be. But I would that's something I would enjoy. And then maybe there was an aspect where he was like a very rough vigilante, kind of Frank Miller type of thing, where he'd let the mugger get away, but he would just walk while he's running and then just catch up to the guy and just beat the shit out of him. In a very, very early proto version of that. But I really didn't have much more than, I had a concept, a name, a concept, a character design, and just a rough outline of what this was. And I remembered working with Joey on Pawn Shop and how great Joey was at writing these really rich, believable characters. Thought it would be really cool to bring Joey on to help, kind of build this world, because we could do something kind of like what we did in Pawn Shop was, instead of having, these multiple little stories connect through a pawn shop, it's this fellow walking around this town. And that's how these little stories connect to each other. And that's kind of how we started building that world and this general concept, and then kind of building the why of why he's dressed like the street walking sign. Like, why are there even street signs? Where do these images come from? Did someone on a drafting board in the 30s smoking a bunch of cigarettes and a technical pen put these together? Or perhaps are these totems of some lost knowledge that we as a people have forgotten, but we just inherently know in our genes, like, oh, we just stop at a stop sign.
I love that so much. Again, the idea just really clicks with me, which it obviously clicks with a lot of people. Again, we're selling out everywhere, and I'm a really big fan, and as me as a person, like, of small things like that. Like, again, I know this is a lot of people feel this way, but this is more of a me problem. But like, I don't know, people who leave their carts in the parking lot, or somebody takes up 2 spaces just like little things like that. Like, I hate that stuff. And I don't know if you've ever seen like cart narcs on YouTube. That's like, I love those. They literally go around and like stop people from leaving their carts. So I always really love the concept of, again, small things you can do. We all can't save the universe, but we can all do kind of little things every day to improve the life of everybody. And so again, I just really love that. And for Joey, so Sean hits you up again from your work for Pawn Shop to kind of develop this character a little bit more, give him a little bit more depth. What was your first reaction to this? Like, when he showed you this character, what was your first reaction? Because again, this book, I didn't know what to expect. I saw the cover, and I think the image that you put together, Sean, just, it begs for questions. Like, you see it and you just like want to know more. So again, Joey, what was your kind of first reaction to this concept, to this idea?
I loved it, and it was kind of like a lightning for me, because it reminded me instantly of this guy in my hometown. There's a small city, and there used to be this guy. I imagine he's still doing it, but he would basically speed walk everywhere. I mean, he was jogging, but it was kind of like slow jogging, because he was doing it all day long. Like, you would see him on the side of the road, just going to the store or whatever. I don't know what his name was. I don't know anyone that knows him personally, but he was like a fixture in town that everyone was aware of. Like, the paper would do stories on him sometimes, things like that. So that's where just keeping a healthy lifestyle. And I immediately thought of that. And so that sort of, I think, planted the seed of, using this as a way to explore the smaller town of Summer City and the characters who live there. And it just kind of, spiderwebbed out from there. But I love what you said about the small things. My first job in that town was working at a local grocery store where I was bagging groceries and going out to get carts and stuff. And that shit used to drive me insane. One time
so
I had
bad for those dudes. I'm like, I'll literally,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, guys. Like, here,
So, like,
you know.
and I think working in a job like that, or food service or customer service in general, and being on the receiving end of some truly awful, terrible people, like the character in issue 1 who berates James for, not giving him his change. There are people like that. And I think having that experience, at least for me, allows me to operate in the world in a way where I'm more empathetic to the person on the other side of the counter, or just like little things to make their lives easier, because, I'm sure that a teenager doesn't want to be. I had to fish a shopping cart out of a river one time because, this wasn't like a big chain. It was a locally owned, family owned small supermarket. And those carts were expensive. And my boss made me go to a river with a giant fish hook and throw it to catch the thing and like pull it out of the fucking river. And that sucked. And like, what kind of person throws a cart into the river?
Literally.
We're going to just go ahead and get that cart out of the river.
Yeah. So just experiencing things like that, I think it's important to remember those moments and to do what you can to make someone else's experience a little bit easier if you can, but yeah, so the idea really struck me right away. And I feel like I actually went back to our original emails not too long ago just to like see where it came from. And it really is just like, it just started off really strong. It was like the end of 2019 and just ideas back and forth, sketches, and just, it was kind of off to the races. And it's evolved a lot since then. But that's kind of why I think this sort of gestation period that we've had of working on it through COVID and taking so long to get it picked up just really helped us kind of mold it into what it became. So
there are still things that, I'm still being surprised by, of not being aware of it. There was there's someone who made a reference to the Noid about one of the characters who pops up in a future issue. Was like, oh wait, yeah, that's kind of holy shit. And then that kind of connects to something else down the road. Like, oh wow, oh yeah. I texted Joey. He's like, oh my god, yeah. And he goes, you know this? Like,
but on my side too, there was a panel in issue 2. I think I was doing like the lettering pass before it was going to go to print, and I was like, oh shit, I didn't realize he put that in there. It was like just like a little thing in the background that I hadn't noticed before after however many years. So I think it's fun that it's still surprising us in that way and finding new ways to connect these thematic elements that we're developing in new and interesting ways. It's a lot of fun to work on, and I hope we get to keep doing it.
I mean, on the one side, here's the ash can of the first cover that we did. That we really love the layout. We had this on a banner for years, so we wanted to kind of update it, but kind of keep this layout to try to recapture this effect in a way. And that's when we kind of came up with the second one. But then, if you look deep on this cover, there's lots of little details in the background. Like there's people like in the windows that you maybe don't necessarily catch on first glance. There's a lot of information on this one image that you may not get on first look, and that's something that was really important to us for the eventual reread that you do of like. It's like Arrested Development, where there's little notes that you didn't catch the first 20 times you saw it, but will catch down the road of the different layers of the things that we're doing here.
I love that so much because this book just begs for questions, and you guys kind of pull the rug out from under us, which I want to get to kind of the structure and all of that of the book. But I really quickly, I want to ask you, Sean, just because this is another thing I personally love. I've always thought like speed walking looks hilarious, and like me and my friends used to like watch like YouTube videos of like professional speed walking because it just looks like so funny, but also so efficient. So I want to like you draw it so well, like the way, like the anatomy of it. So again, just very quickly, I was just curious, how did you go about like just nailing that anatomy? Because it's such a kind of weird pose, you know?
I think I do a lot of reference photos. So there's a file somewhere there's a rudimentary suit of this built where there's a lot of reference on here where a lot of the reference is me in the suit. So that's why I get a little touchy about the unflattering comments about the suit. It's like, well, fuck you.
That needs to be in like a director's cut of the Pedestrian.
That's going to be in the trade.
Almost every image of the Pedestrian, it's like, you know, more or less it's been based on an image of me in a similar suit and goggles, and that's kind of where we do get that. I do love the concept of speed walking. I think especially if you're taking, you know, I'm from New York, so everyone, you know, walks, and people will come and be like, hey, how far of a walk is this? And it's like, well, are you a walker? Is walking something you do, or are you talking to a New Yorker walking? Because a New Yorker walking 20 minutes is different from someone from a small town who walked to their garage and into their car, and from their car to the Publix, walking 20 minutes. So I always thought it would be really funny of like, you know, he doesn't seemingly this is a guy with no superpowers, but if you think about it, someone who could walk at a big city level in a small town, isn't that kind of a superpower in that context?
Yeah, literally.
How'd he get here?
Yeah, dude's cruising. And I think it goes to kind of the early concept you were talking about, almost like that, like Jason Michael Myers kind of like just kind of pop, like always walking, but pops out of nowhere. But obviously we didn't go like the brutal route with it. But you definitely get that, like the first couple pages, his first interaction when he stops the purse mugging and he stops at the light. Like, even though he was stopped, I never felt like he wasn't going to catch the guy. I was like, he's still going to get this guy. And so I want to talk a little bit about the structure of this book, because that's another thing I really love about it. You guys talk about kind of inspiration from early Marvel issues, how they were kind of broken up into chapters. And we see a very similar structure here. But, and this is something I kind of want to keep a little under wraps because it really surprised me, and I want to keep that surprise for everybody else. But we've kind of alluded to it already a little bit, but there are a lot of deeper elements to this that we get more into as the series goes on. So, again, I just kind of want to ask you guys about the structure of the book. How did you guys kind of land on having that structure, and how do you decide how to structure that as it's going? So like when to put in these kind of reveals, or, you know, should you string it on along a little bit longer, those kind of things.
Yeah. So a lot of that came from when we were originally developing this. Like Sean mentioned, it was COVID. We were like, I don't know if comic books are going to exist. Like you know, it's easy to forget how we didn't have any information. It was very scary. Like it felt apocalyptic, kind of was apocalyptic. But so we were talking about doing it as like a vertical scroll webtoons kind of series, which also would allow Sean to do. There's a lot of like great, like faux animation of him walking towards the camera and stuff like that, because it works like that when you can just scroll infinitely. So we were structuring it in a way where we could release chapters essentially, which are very similar to the chapters that ended up in the final product. But, you know, so like one chapter would be Kira's story. And then as we release them weekly or whatever it was going to be, they would all sort of start to interconnect. And that we retained a lot of that when we moved it over to like a more traditional comic book format. And I think that Marvel inspiration is spot on. And in terms of revealing things, I think the way that we started this book, I think, has made it feel a little offbeat, like structurally and also pacing wise, which I really, really love. So there are some sort of traditional splash page reveals, but I also like that there's some reveals. There's one in issue 2 particularly that I won't mention, but it's a pretty big reveal story wise that happens in Sophie's story, but it's not played like a giant reveal. Do you know what I mean? And I think that is something that's really interesting to me, to almost make these huge moments feel mundane so that the really insane moments really feel special.
Yeah, that absolutely hit for me, exactly like you were saying. Again, I think it goes tandem with Sean's art. Again, just begs for questions. And like, we're not being spoon fed all this stuff. We're kind of discovering it as it goes on, which I absolutely love.
And I think that's something that's really important to me as a creator, but also as a reader. Like, I don't want to be spoon fed. I want a book to require some rereads to like really get it. That's why I love Grant Morrison's writing so much, which is a huge influence, of course. But just the idea that trusting the reader to be with you for the ride, and be engaged in a way that you feel comfortable enough, like maybe not explaining every single detail or connecting every dot or dotting every I, and just letting them draw their own conclusions, but also put the pieces there to present the answer in a way that they might have to work a little bit for. I think that's really interesting and fun for me as a reader. So I'm hopeful that we're doing that in this book. But I guess we'll see once the later issues come out what the reaction is.
But that's also been fun about the reaction of of the hero of the story, because he's kind of a weirdo walking around at night in a costume, and he's non-verbal, so he's not saying don't worry, I'm not crazy. So most times you see someone in a costume, they're either on their way to a Halloween party. It's either Halloween on the day that you're seeing it, or they're begging for change in Times Square. The fact that he's not able to just say, oh, don't worry, I'm not crazy, kind of leaves that awkward moment, and he's kind of a blank slate where people can kind of pin their hopes and dreams on the guy, where they're like, I don't know anything about this guy, but he's just being judged literally by his actions and what he's doing,
or his fear, or you're pinning your fears and anxieties on him as well.
We don't know. And it's always been because we've had these ash cans forever, so we've been able to like see in real time kind of what the response has been. It hasn't been a hard sell. We would put a copy of the book on the table, there's a banner, someone walks over and they go, what is this? Tell me what this is. And a lot of times they go over, and especially if it's a shop, we're seeing in reviews as well on League of Comic Geeks, where people go over like, okay, this was actually really good. I had no expectations on this. I had low expectations. So it's people walking over going, what is this? And they pick it up and they look at it, they're like, oh, come on. And then I kind of think they get to that moment where he stops at the stoplight, and that's kind of the turning point where they're like, oh, this is my favorite thing now. Where we have, we start off in a very traditional comic book sense where there is a mugging happening. Batman, Spider-Man, this is a standard way to start a comic. And then we take a turn that really hasn't been done before. Where, yes, he's fighting this crime, but he's also not going to break this rule, because rules are important in this world, and we'll learn why down the road. I also love that everyone's like, oh, this is so funny. This is the funniest book. Whereas it's a comedy in the way that Twin Peaks is a comedy, where it's like, yes, there are very quirky, charming moments, but then there's also another layer of like really messed up stuff that's happening and going to happen in this world. And we're really going to see that more in chapter 2. So we're really excited to see, on 9/11 when issue 2 comes out. So don't forget, I won't be doing signings that day, but 9/11 is such a perfect day for this new chapter of the book to come out, because it's such an emotional day anyway, to then also have this new layer of this emotional attack of a book happening to you at the same time. Really, really excited to see what the responses are going to be on this one.
And I absolutely can't wait. I mean, again, issue 1 just completely took me over, hooked me immediately, and I think it's all because of all the things you guys are saying. It's funny, it's kind of quirky, but underneath that, there's just so much heart into it. And I love how you guys explain the pedestrian, the hero, perfectly, as like, you can imbue your own feelings. Like, he's a blank slate. And I really think like this book will mean different things to different people. And so I'm so excited to get more and into this and go deeper into this. Everybody watching, listening to this, go to your local comic shop, pick up a copy of Pedestrian, and be sure to put it on your list so you get issue 2. And one of the last questions I have for you guys, which I have so many more questions, but we're closing in on time. But again, one of the reasons I think that this really connects with people is you guys have talked about a lot of this book, again, while it's funny, while it's quirky, underneath it, you guys really want to center this around the community and the idea of being good to your neighbor, and that we can overcome differences and help each other like we used to. So when people read this book, again, besides the fun and following the adventures of the Pedestrian, what do you guys hope that people will take away from this book?
Wow, that's a great question. Sean, you go first.
I think a lot of what we're talking about in this book is, we have characters who are a very black and white tent pole of where good, evil. But the world isn't really good and evil. We exist in a world where we live in narratives that we have to create of, I'm a good person, that guy's a bad person. And that's how I can see myself fitting into the world, because everyone has to be the hero of their own story. And with that being said, these divides we have based on, you say 2 or 3 wrong words these days, and that person is no longer your friend forever. Who you voted for, beliefs you have, and we're not able to, coexist anymore because we're being radicalized in such a way where we have to be an extreme level of one side or another side, on a very separate path, kind of eating each other and and being very combative with each other, that we're not really coming together and seeing what the real problems are. It's not, our problems are not human problems. Our problems are a little above us in terms of the people who really do control our destinies, in a sense, of the people who decide how much milk costs, the people who decide how much rent we have to pay or where we can live. You can live here, you can't live here. And we had a moment, especially during lockdown, where every single person on the planet, for one time in our lifetime, experienced the same thing, experienced something very dramatically scary that I think a lot of people have not really embraced, of accepting this as what it was, of a significant trauma where everyone's lives were disrupted in a very fundamental way for a long time, over a year. Aspects of this are still going on. We as a society have decided we're going to move on. Okay, we did the thing. Okay, we can take the masks off. We're done with this. But nothing really changed, and that's bizarre. And we just have to live in this bizarre world because as a group have decided this is what we're doing. How wacky is that? And I think there has to be a way where we can kind of come back into the middle a little bit, where we don't have to agree all the time, but we have to be civil. We have to be kind. Just because we don't agree on something doesn't mean you're evil or you're a bad person. You still love your kids. You're still doing the best you can in your world. And there's a fundamental lack of respect that people don't have for another type of person, being where you live, where you come from, where you kneel to, where you pray to. And that's just not cool. There was a moment where we could have really gotten our shit together as a people, and we could be having this conversation in space. But, something took a turn where we fundamentally disagreed about the thing that happened to all of us, of what the interpretation of that thing was, and that's really sad. And I think what the Pedestrian is someone who is either inadvertently or inadvertently building a community. Because what is community? It's the connections you have with your neighbor, of you have shared experiences of like, oh, you know this guy, I know this guy, let's talk about this. This guy knows this guy too. Well, we gotta talk about this guy too. And I think that's really kind of the fun thing we're seeing in the book. And as these stories connect, we're seeing a community that was decimated slowly kind of rebuilding slowly. And we have, by the end of this, we're going to have this group that are now bonded by these experiences. And I think we like to talk about leading by example with the Pedestrian. I think that's something that we can all do. And as you pointed out earlier, like, we can't stop a moving vehicle, but we can help someone in a supermarket grab something from a tall shelf. We can be kind to someone. There's someone asking for change. We may not have the change, but we can make eye contact with a person and just say, hey, I'm really sorry. I can't help you today, but I'm not going to ignore you. I'm going to talk to you as a person and give you a modicum of respect. And we can all take a moment in our days to just try and be a little better than what our instincts tell us to be. And I think slowly and surely, if we can do this, the world will eventually become a better place.
Yeah, I think it is just about empathy, and and look, I'm guilty of it too. Like my first instinct, if I see a bumper sticker or a flag I disagree with, is to give it the finger and tell a person to go fuck themselves. But and I think there's something to that, but also, is that helping anyone? Not really, including myself. I think it's more valuable to engage with that person and try to understand why they think the way that they think, and hopefully make them see a different perspective. I think we're so locked into people being unable to change, or good is good, bad is bad, but it's more nuanced than that. And I think it's important to talk about those things and just have like Sean said, just a baseline respect for another human being, whatever their perceived station in society might be. And so I don't know, if someone can read this book and be like, oh, I should really consider this person's point of view next time I see them, that feels like a win to me. I just think in general, if people had more empathy for each other, we could unite against the big evil that is bearing down upon all of us in the form of corporations and leaders that don't have our interests at heart. So I don't know. It's a lofty goal for a little comic book, but that's sort of where we're coming from, I think, on this.
I think that all of that translates through in the book, and all of that comes forward, which again, I think why it has connected with so many people. And again, I feel like this is a type of book that will mean something different to everybody, and everybody will take away what they need from that book, which I think is one of the major strengths of this. So again, everybody listening, watching this, go out to your comic shop, get issue 1, make sure to put issue 2 on your pulls right now. Currently we're looking at 4 issues with the hopes of an ongoing, but I did see you guys say that if you do get to do what you want to do and are planning to do, it'll be the weirdest, wildest payoff that we've seen in a generation. And I mean, that's a quote right there. And if that doesn't get you running to your comic shops, folks, I don't know what will. Again, this book, you have to read it. No matter what you think about it, give it a chance. And I promise you're going to walk away loving it. My dudes, I cannot thank you guys enough for taking the time out of your day and come and talk to me about this. So I want to throw it off to you guys really quickly before we get out of here. Plug yourselves. Where can the people find you? Again, Pedestrian, that hopefully we can get it to an ongoing. But do you guys have anything else that you're working on that maybe you can talk about? Anything in the works?
Nothing that's been announced just yet, but I am doing a a graphic novel with Z2 Comics with a couple of music licenses that hopefully will get announced later this year. But I'm working directly with a couple of rappers for a very, very strange book, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited about that.
I'm not gonna say anything. Yes, I'm super.
And I have Sesame Street coming out from Oni Press. I wrote a couple issues of. One just got solicited today, in fact, as we've been on this call, which is so the first issue that I wrote is about Grover helping his pals. And I also wrote issue 4, which is about the Amazing Mumford and the Count, and a magic show that happens and goes awry on Sesame Street when all the numbers disappear, which obviously freaks the Count out. And I'll also have some DC stuff coming soonish that hasn't been announced yet, but yeah, and then more Pedestrian, hopefully forever. And I'm on the internet at Joey Esposito, which is mostly just comics and pictures of my pets.
Let's go, folks. Come on. We got to get this to an ongoing. I'm leading the army to the comic shop. And be sure, again, to follow these guys because they are just so great. And I am just a big fan of everything they're doing. I think everything they're going to be doing in the future is also going to be great. I'll be putting all the links to all of this stuff that we've talked about in the description of this video. So you don't even got to leave. Just go right under here and you can find Sean, Joey, their work, everything you need. Again, thank you guys for coming in and talking with me today. Everyone out there, thank you so much for watching and listening to this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving us a like and subscribe. You can follow Comic Corner on Twitter and TikTok. And you can also follow Agents of Fandom on all of our socials. That's Agents Fandom on Twitter and TikTok. Agents of Fandom everywhere else. And be sure, go help somebody today. Go out, help that old lady cross the street. Go pick up something off the top shelf for someone. Do something nice for somebody.
Put because your away.
Yeah, exactly. Again, remember, justice always has the right of way, and you too can walk. So, everyone, that's going to be all we have for you guys, and we will see you all next time.